Hello, everybody, and welcome to Change the Conversations. I am Amy Vanderlinden, and we are going to dive into a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I know to many others. If you're new to the podcast, we are trying to, as the title says, change some of the conversations. I think more importantly, even have the conversations with real people in real time about their areas of expertise and try to just get some different perspectives. And again, in a way that actually could lead to some understanding or perspective in those areas so that we're not just subject to only the hype and only the media. And maybe we can sift through some of the BS. And our lovely guest today, Sara, actually sifts through a lot of actual bull and horse duty because you have an amazing ranch. And so I'm very grateful that you were able to take the time today. I know you've got your little ones. And so our guest today is Sara Burris, and her family owns an actual ranch. So I'm going to let her introduce herself and tell her more about that. Thank you so much for coming on today, Sara.
Thanks, Amy. Thank you so much for inviting me and allowing me to talk to your listeners. So like Amy said, I am a cattle rancher. I'm a third generation cattle rancher, but I'm also a wife. I'm also a mother to three very little kids, ages 5 to almost a year. And I am a third generation rancher of a cow-calf operation. So that just means that we raise mama cows and we breed them with our bulls, and they have calves. And then once those calves are weaning age, they typically go to the sale barn, or what you would also call an auction. And about almost 4 years now, we started direct marketing some of those, keeping those calves and doing a direct market beef sales. So a lot of that started around COVID and 2020. So yeah.
And the name of your ranch is?
Yeah, the name of our ranch is Easy Ranch, and we're in Yavapai County.
Awesome. And so, yeah, I've known Sara for quite a few years, since just after she had her first. And so I think that I've bought, what I end up getting, a quarter of a cow, or did
Yeah,
Court and I split a quarter?
yeah. You got a quarter of a grass finished.
Yeah. So we're going to get into that, right? Grass-fed beef, like that's all the rage, right? And so again, the point of this podcast is to try to have real conversations and sift through some of those. I mean, not all of that is obviously hype, right? There's something to be said for grass-fed, but then it's like, okay, well, what is grass-fed, grain finished? And the point of buying grass-fed meat and knowing where it's raised. And so I'm really excited to have you on. You are truly an expert in all of this, especially you guys focus specifically on cows. So we're not going to be talking about like pigs or chickens or anything like that, you guys. But why don't you tell us a little bit about why you started to direct market and some of the different options you guys do provide related to grass and green, and where they're raised and all that.
Yeah, so kind of it kind of all started because we had some bigger steers. So a steer is a male calf that got castrated, so they can't breed. And we had some bigger ones that were just missed in pasture. It happens sometimes. And it was around the same time as COVID. And we decided to keep one for ourselves to go ahead and put in our freezer. Wasn't something that we've done in a really long time. And then also it was around the COVID. And at the same time, stores were limiting the amount of beef that you could buy. And as ranchers, we knew it wasn't a supply issue. There's enough beef and people growing beef and raising beef, beef and feedlots. It was just an issue getting that beef to the stores. So it's kind of an issue at the processing side. And then also whatever thoughts you might want to have on why stores were limiting. And so that's kind of where we started. Around that same time, I also quit my full-time job and was going to stay home with my kids, or one kid at the time. And so it's just something that some people reached out to us and were interested in, and it just kept going from there and kept growing. And so we offer anything and everything that you can think of, I feel like, with beef. So we, you can say we do a custom finish on beef. So We offer grass finished beef. So they're raised on the pastures. If that pasture's out on the native grasslands, and then they come into what we call our headquarters. So that's an area that is privately owned property. And we have irrigated grass pastures that they are finished out on. They're also supplemented with hay whenever we need to, if our pastures aren't growing enough, or if it's winter time and so forth. So we offer grass finish, so you can call it grass fed, grass finished beef, all natural, no antibiotics, no hormones. We also offer grain finished beef. So those beef would be same deal, raised on native grasslands. They come into our headquarters. We finish them out on our irrigated pastures, but then they're also finished on grain for the last so many days before they go to the processing facility. And so, with that, it's a lot of it's personal preference on what people want. Whenever you're buying a grass finished beef, your fat color is going to look different. I like to make sure people are aware of that. It looks more of a yellow fat because of that more native grass and pasture. It'll turn a little bit more white whenever they're fed hay. Still, they're just going to be a leaner beef. It's going to be a smaller beef. They don't grow as big, and they're going to be lean. So you're not going to have a lot of marbling, and you're not going to have a lot of outside fat on those steaks. With your grain finished beef, you're going to have more marbling. So that's the fat inside the muscles that you're going to see. If you look at a steak, you're going to see kind of some fat in with the red meat. And they're going to have more outside fat, and they're going to have a little bit of a different taste. Their fat color is going to be white, and they are just going to taste a little different because they have that grain in them. And so if you're looking for something that's comparable to what you're going to buy in the store, you're going to want to, I suggest grain finished beef. If you like the marbling, you like the fat. And then if you're wanting something that's lean and not fed grain, then I tell people, a grass finished beef would be more ideal in what you're going to want. It's going to taste a little bit different. I like to describe it as it tastes more beefy. But no matter what, the beef that you buy directly from a rancher is going to taste absolutely different than what you're going to buy in a store.
Yeah. So like I said earlier, I bought a quarter of a cow from Sarah's ranch, and we stuck with grass finished, and it has been pretty lean. I'll tell you about that skirt steak later. Awesome flavor, but I overcooked it. Anyway, we're not going to linger on that matter. Why don't you help us sort through? That was great about grass versus green. And I think to understand that neither one is going to taste like what you buy in a store, and both are going to be very healthy in terms of these animals were raised out on open land, open pastures. They spent very little time in fenced areas, very little time inside any kind of sheltered areas, out in natural sunshine, natural water, all of that stuff, right?
Yeah, and I don't want people to get a misconception on feedlots either. Something that I like to have the conversation with our customers whenever they ask is, yes, our beef are in pastures. They do get put in pens sometimes, but those pens aren't small. They can run around. They can move around. They have shade. Especially during the summer, we make sure that they have shade available. If they use it, it's up to them. Sometimes they don't. But I also don't want people to get a misconception on feedlots that they're stuck inside, that they're stuck in small pens. They still have an area to walk around and roam around. You're just gonna have a bigger congregation of cattle in that area, but it's still very large pens that they're in. We have the ability that we have the pastures that we can put our cattle on. They're still fenced, but they're not. Our pastures are fenced because they have to be, but they're just irrigated grass pastures, and so it's just a matter of what we're able to do on that end. If we didn't have feedlots, we couldn't feed the world. So, I try to make that, I want people to know that they're still coming from ranches, but how we raise our beef is just what we want to choose to do differently. And some people want to choose to buy beef differently and know their background is, and know that they're not getting hormones, they're not getting antibiotics, they're not getting anything unnecessary that they don't need if they're not
Yeah.
sick.
Well, let's go ahead and jump into that. So you'll see that a lot where either stuff's not marked at all, or you will see no added hormones or antibiotics too. Can you tell a little bit about what is a normal process of raising a cow? What is common practice with meat that you'd find in the store versus what you guys do, if there's a difference? Just explain a little bit more about that. That'd be helpful.
Yeah. So, like I said, again, to feed the world, and feed our population, whenever you are buying beef out of a feedlot, everything from my knowledge is those beef do get hormone implants. And so they're kind of like little seeds that they implant subcutaneously, so in their ear. And typically that's where it's at. And so sub-Q would be underneath the skin. And that just helps that animal. It puts out a hormone that makes them want to eat, 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 and eat. And so they just grow faster. So, that's something that they do. I'm not sure on every feedlot on how antibiotics are used. There's always the conception out there that some people just give them antibiotics to give them antibiotics. But I can also tell you that those feedlot owners are also generational. And so if they're giving something, I think they give it in precaution because they kind of know what day those animals may or may not get sick. On the rancher side, we ranchers give vaccines to keep those animals from getting sick on the range, and also from catching any illness if they are transported and go somewhere. So yes, we give our animals as calves, they get vaccines. If our animals didn't get those vaccines, they would just get sick. And that's just even just being out on the range. And but every vaccine and medication has a withdrawal period. And so as far as labels go, I'm not current on labels on beef that say no hormones. I know on milk it says no hormones. But labeling is a big conversation in the cattle industry and with the National Cattlemen's Beef Board. Right now, a lot of that, people have talked about having QR codes on labels where you can scan that QR code at a kiosk in a store, and it gives you that whole history of the animal. If that will ever come to play, I don't know. But that's kind of what people are looking for, right? Especially when you're buying from the rancher. So us as ranchers, whenever we wean those cattle and we're keeping that cattle for our direct market beef program, we don't do anything else to them. I take that back. The only thing we do to them is we do deworm them. Cattle get parasites from eating on the ground. Just like you and I would get parasites if we ate stuff on the ground and everything without washing it. And so they do get dewormed. And then they get to live their best life. I post pictures on our social media of our irrigated pastures, and they just get to be cows. They get mineral blocks because that's what they need to stay healthy. And they get supplemented with hay if need be, but most of the time they just can sustain on what pastures we have. And they don't get any hormones in them. We don't inject them with any of the antibiotics. If there's something that we do get one that's sick, I'm not saying that as ranchers are going to let that animal suffer, but they'll get pulled from our meat program. So did I answer your questions?
Yeah, I think related to the hormones and the medications, you mentioned something about like there's a certain time frame that any vaccines or medications would stay in their system. Can you say any more about that in terms of how that would impact meat once the cow's grown and they've gone all the way through the program and are now being sold?
Yeah, so to my knowledge base, so they call them the withdrawal period, and there's tests and tests and tests, numerous tests done on animals to see how long that medication stays in that animal's system. And so what they do is they butcher animals every single day, and then they find that day when there's no more trace of that medication in the animal. I don't know what studies that are out there that have been done on animals that have been injected with something, and what it would do to that animal as they grow and are an adult, mature animal. But I do know vaccines or antibiotics that are approved by the FDA to be used have been tested such that they know when that trace of that medication is out of the animal, so out of that meat, out of their blood system, and that's what is on your label of your withdrawal period. So anything that would get processed at a facility, everything's tested. So if it's your meat in your store is USDA inspected, so it's a federal inspection, and everything's tested. So say you sent something and it was within the withdrawal period and they test that animal, your whole lot, so all the animals that you sent are getting pulled out, and you pretty much get like a red flag on your name. So people don't want to send stuff that is within the withdrawal period of any type of medication that they may have to give that animal.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Okay, that's helpful. What else? You were starting to mention, you and I were chatting before we got started, and you mentioned like people are mentioning the possibility of QR codes or different types of labeling. Is there any current legislation that you're aware of or ways for people to know more of what's actually going on or truth about it?
Yeah, so NCBA is a great resource for people. That's a group of cattlemen and cattlewomen that are in the industry, and they're boots on the ground. They're the ones that, um, they have a background in ranching and cattle, whether that be ranching, feedlot, backgrounders. So they have a background in cattle in the cattle industry, and they're the ones that are going out there and doing legislative work. As far as, labeling, and there's a lot of stuff going on um in any political realm with ranching, especially these last couple years. And so there is a big push for a US label, and a push with what that legislation says. So you know, just something that those cattle are from the US, not necessarily that they're processed in the US. So there's a lot of exportation, there's a lot of importation of beef. But so that's a good resource. They have a lot of legal stance, and um can't think of the correct word, but they have a lot of a voice
Okay.
on
Like
the
they're the ones actually lobbying and talking to lawmakers and different things like that.
right. Yeah.
Okay.
And so then, as you get smaller, you then go to like the states, and each state has a representative on that with the NCBAs and talk with them about, okay, this is what our state wants. So like Arizona has the Arizona Cattle Growers Association. You also have the Beef Council, and Arizona Beef Council is ours. The Beef Checkoff Program. They're all great resources and great things that are in place for a reason. And so those are kind of places that you can go and ask questions or look on their websites, and they'll have links and reviews. The American National Cattlewomen Association is another great one. We call it ANCW. I'm also a member of that, along with the Arizona State Cowbells, which is the same thing. We just call ourselves cowbells instead of cattlewomen. And so, those are all resources for people that want to talk to people that are actually in industry, actual ranchers. Those are the type of groups that those people are a part of.
That's super helpful. Well, and let's go back to, so another thing is like the type of cow, right? So you've heard about like Black Angus or Wagyu or different things. To what extent does that matter if someone just cares about eating healthy meat?
If you care about eating healthy meat, then I don't think the breed necessarily matters, but where your meat's coming from, and how those animals are raised, I think matters. So you mentioned Wagyu, so we have gotten into the Wagyu realm of things, and so that's your higher dollar meat, because it is extremely tender. There's been studies on that meat, so I don't want to say I'm going to contradict myself, but there is studies on the Wagyu meat of that fat content being those good healthy fats. And that's different than like your Angus. I think both are delicious. I think a good quality meat is, no matter whatever you can afford, getting good quality meat is healthy. Sometimes your marbling differs, and that's more so genetics. So you can still have a Black Angus, but it may not have the genetics where you're going to have a good marbling content. So marbling goes into genetics, and it also goes into the breed. But it's not to say that another, like a beef master animal, isn't a good quality beef either. You just might have a different marbling content, different tenderness. There's a lot of factors that go into it: age, how you feed them out, their stress level, just a lot of different things.
Yeah, of course.
And that's more the quality, yeah.
Well, and that's kind of where my next question was going. So I feel like there used to be that expression, you get what you pay for. And I feel like there's a lot of situations where it's like, no, you get what the marketing has paid for. And so maybe you can help us again, kind of get through the weeds here a little bit of, like you're saying, Wagyu is known as a higher dollar beef, and possibly in that case for good reason. But what are some of the things that are worth it, and obviously, like, buying from a local rancher is more expensive than picking up a sale at Safeway or whatever. But what are some of the aspects that are worth paying for, and what's some of the nonsense? I would love your insight on that.
Yeah. I would, like you said, just definitely be careful about the marketing. I'm all for, and I would always suggest to people to support your local farmer ranchers. But I would also, just because you know where it's coming from, and you can hopefully get an honest background of where that animal's been, what they're getting, how they've been fed. But I also don't want people to not eat beef because they're buying it from the store, because that's all they can afford. But supporting local anything is always going to be better for your community and for your state. But yeah, definitely just have that conversation, ask questions where if you do buy local, there's a lot of people that sell local meat. But definitely I want people to ask questions. Where is this meat coming from? Is this something that's been born on your ranch? Are you buying it from somewhere else? If you are buying it, where are you buying it from? How are you finishing this animal? Where are they getting processed? Just those kind of questions.
That's super helpful. We can put some of those questions in the show notes, you guys. So what are some answers because I think sometimes too, like, I know a lot of ranchers are like, you can come see where our cows are raised. You can come meet your cow, like whatever, right? But then we don't necessarily ask about processing. Like, I assume you've got a guy, and then you bring it to my house. And so what are some of the questions that they should ask about processing, or what are some answers we should actually watch out for?
Yeah. So, for as far as processing goes,
Yeah.
So something that I'm always all about following the rules, and also just because of my background. So if you're buying like a half a cow, or you're buying packaged beef from a local rancher, that you want to look at that packaging. And so if you're buying a half, a whole, or even a quarter, that animal, you should be getting asked what your address is, because that animal needs to be inspected by a livestock inspector. You're essentially buying the live animal. The rancher can take it to the processor. They would process it under what's called custom exempt. and it can only be done at a Arizona processing facility. And so all the processing facilities in Arizona, the Arizona Department of Agriculture has a meat and poultry division, and they do inspect those plants. They have to go and follow guidelines and rules and so forth, cleanliness. So definitely can go about that route. It's called custom exempt processing. We started out that way. We now do commercial slaughter, and that means that all of our beef go to a Arizona processing plant, but they're inspected under state inspection. And so anytime whenever that animal's dispatched and when that animal is cut up, a state inspector has to be there. And then we have a label, and on that label, it has a little triangle symbol and it has a number in there, and that's the processing plant that animal was processed at. And it also has like our name and our logo, but it's an official label. It has to be approved. And so those are the kind of things that you want to look for. If it has no label at all and it just has a stamp on it, that's definitely a custom exempt. It should have a stamp that says not for resale. And so if you have someone that's trying to sell you packages like that, that's technically illegal. And you have to sell packages, you have to be under state inspection, you have to have a license. We have a small business, I want to say it's a small business license that we have with ADA or AZDA. And so those are just kind of the things to keep an eye on. Again, just, if they're going to lie to you about being able to sell the packages to you, then I don't want to know what else they're lying to you about.
That makes sense. And I think most people would, if I saw a package and it said not for resale and they said, oh, that's because, we should have sold this as a whole half a cow and we're letting you buy isolated steaks or whatever, I would probably just think, oh, okay. But,
Yeah.
And also like, if I just heard some of the language about custom exempt versus commercial slaughter, like I would potentially think maybe commercial isn't as good as custom, but as long as it's getting done in Arizona, you're saying it's regulated by all the same state inspectors, correct?
Yeah, it's just whenever it's a custom exempt, that state inspector is not there whenever it's getting like cut. It's not necessarily there whenever it gets dispatched, but they do checks on those plants to make sure that they're following the rules as far as the cleanliness goes and everything else they have to follow.
Okay. Is there anything else that people should watch out for if something is a smaller, because like, again, we don't want to penalize a smaller operation who might be doing something custom exempt. Anything else people should watch out for, or just ask questions about where it was processed and where the meat came from?
Yeah, I would just, those are kind of the questions I would look for. I would also look at their price points if you're looking around. If they're super below what everyone else is, I'd question that. Or
That's
maybe
a
not
good thing to
money.
discuss. What is
What?
kind of the going rate for local grown, local ranch? Let's go with, because is there a different price point for grass fed or grain?
There can be. So there is for us. And that price difference is only because of what it cost us.
Right.
So for us, our grass finished is cheaper. Everyone get their shock out while we're there. I know you're going to pay for more grass finished in the stores, but for us, it's typically cheaper on some cuts. And if you're buying by the bulk, so you're buying a half a cow, it's going to be cheaper than our grain finished, because our grain finished, where that extra cost comes from the grain. And we're not a feedlot. We don't have farm land. We don't farm or harvest any type of grain. So we're buying that. We buy it by the ton. And so that's just where your extra cost is that grain cost. We personally eat grain finished beef. So, that's why we kind of raise both, because we have a 50-50 customer base. It's personal preference and what you're looking for, what your health needs are, and so forth. So
while we're on the grass-fed grain again, let me ask this question. So obviously being gluten-free has gotten a ton of press for many years now. But so some people do you ever have people that ask you what grains you feed them, or like what correlation, if any, should there be for someone who's truly celiac or truly has issues processing grains? Like, how much of that comes through the meat? Can you maybe shed some light on that issue?
Yeah, so I haven't found any hard studies on the gluten that passes through the grain into the animal. I don't think it does pass into the animal. So cows are ruminant animals. They have 4 stomachs. They really, really break down those grains. And so I do get people that ask what kind of grain. That question has been more so for GMOs than it
Mm.
has been for gluten. But me being gluten free, I don't notice any issues with it, but I'm not a true celiac. So like again, I haven't found any really hard studies on it. But I to know for sure if it does pass through, but because those animals are ruminants, they have those 4 chambers and they have their 4 stomachs. I just don't think that. I think that's all broken down and it doesn't pass through the meat and it doesn't go into it. It's not grown in the meat, if that makes sense. So
Yeah,
as
yeah.
they, yeah. So
All right. Well, and listeners, if you do have some research or you do have some actual evidence or discussion about that, we would love for you to comment or reply back with that. Definitely shed some light on that if possible. I mean, it makes sense that the cows would already digest it and it wouldn't necessarily be. But since you brought it up, let's jump into the GMO conversation. Um, won't we won't deep dive into Roundup issues, but where do you source your grain because of those concerns?
yeah, so we always source our grain from the local feed stores. So if that be Cal Ranch or if that be Olson's grain, um we are not labeled organic. And so because and there's many reasons why, but our hay that we get, we also don't know the treatments on that. So, that's kind of something that we have gotten questions for. Unfortunately, if I lose customers because of that or potential customers because of that, we just can't buy organic grain. We can't, our price point would go way high to be able to buy organic hay. We don't spray Roundup on our facility. And so, our pastures aren't treated with that. Yeah. So, and then
It's a
as far
can
as,
of worms. I mean, I've even talked to some of the
yeah,
local farms, and even with their produce or like at farmers markets that are all from local, and they don't technically have that because not only the additional cost, like they're like, we don't use Roundup or whatever, but because of the cost to get that organic, again, I think it's USDA, I don't want to misspeak, but whoever supervises whether a facility is truly organic or not and gives that stamp and gives that label, that is a very costly process in and of itself. So I've had farmers tell me like, well, we abide by the same rules for the soil and for the use of pesticides and all of that organic farmers do. We just don't pay for the actual organic inspection and labeling. Same
yeah,
thing, cost and price point. But I mean, hey, conceivably would have someone again. It's like, okay, so at what point was that sprayed? And at what point, once the cow eats it, like how much? I mean, we'd all have to eat a certain kind of meat for a while and get blood tested. I can't think of what the chemical is that's in your blood. And the heavy metals or whatever that from the Roundup. I can't think of that right now. But if anybody wants to know more about that, listen to Robert F. Kennedy. That's all I'll say on that for right now.
yeah. And that's the same, it's a 5 year going more into that organic we're the same thing. We follow the guidelines and that's what I have told people, but it's just that hay. And then because we do buy outside grain, and that's a 5 year process. If you want to become organic, it's a 5 year process to be able to get that. It is costly, like you said. And we know farmers that have done it. They have both organic and non-organic, and you have to spray down equipment, or you have separate equipment for organic, separate equipment for your non-organic. So it is costly and it's pretty much a washout as far as what you make because you're spending all that extra money. So if the product costs more, but that covers all the extra money that you're spending on those crops, you're not going to yield as much. But yeah, there's a lot that goes into the organic and the Roundup. So
How old are the cows usually by the time they go to slaughter?
Yeah, so our beef, they're normally around 2 years old whenever they go to butcher.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that pretty common practice?
Um, yeah, if they're coming from a feedlot, they're gonna be younger. Um, but because our cattle grow a bit slower because they're not given hormones, we kind of have a target weights of where we want those animals and we take them to the processor, and that's about, I want to say that I can't speak for other ranchers, but that's about what they are. You don't want anything that's over um a certain age. It's 30 something months. I'm going to say it's 32 to 33 or 34 months. And once they get that age, then they actually have to debone, or they take the spinal, anything that has to do with the spinal column, they remove from your steaks. So like your T-bones and stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that goes into some more science stuff and kind of just, yeah.
Okay. Um, well, and I remember even when we were getting cow from you, like there's a range of a time of when it'll be available because you're waiting for them to make weight, you're waiting to make sure that they're healthy, you're waiting to check all of those different factors. So I do remember that when we were buying. I think I sidetracked us off. You were saying too, like if ranchers are selling meat at too low of a price point, what would be too low? Like what's a ballpark range right now for either grass or grain?
Yeah, I mean, if you're buying a live animal for 2,000, a live, so our whole, I shouldn't say live, a whole animal, for $2,000 to $3,000, I would question it. That's really, really cheap. Our price range is, um, like high fours to low fives, and then you're getting up to close to 6,000 or 5,800 for those grain finished animals. Um, and we try to keep our cost as low as we can, but again, there's the price. Inflation with everyone has affected everyone, and that's
Yeah.
not excluding us with feed
Yeah.
cost, processing cost, fuel costs. So yeah, so that was what I would say is your ballpark range. So again, if you're 3,000, I'd be questioning
Um,
it.
what's that roughly break down to? Like if someone's at a farmer's market and they're selling smaller packages, what's that breakdown roughly to pound wise? I know most people are used to buying meat at $15 a pound or something.
Yeah, so whenever you get to packages, it's gonna vary by
The
what cut
cut.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna vary by your cut. So I'm gonna shock factor everyone because that's what happens. So if you're buying like the price that I gave you, and if you factor that into poundage, so our price, say, is around $13, a little over $13 a pound. And a lot of people say, oh my gosh, I'm paying $13 a pound for ground beef. And I say, well, yes and no. Because you're also getting tenderloin steaks, you're getting ribeye steaks, you're getting New Yorks, you're getting porterhouses. Um, you can get a rib roast if you want rib roasts.
And that would normally run 20 plus per pound.
Right.
It's like the average. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what you would break it down to whenever you're buying a side, but you're getting all these things, and those are all custom cuts that you can choose from. If you're getting a half or larger, you should be able to custom cut how you want that animal cut up.
Well, I will say this because I don't know hardly anything about anything. I just know how to cook ground beef.
Ranching related or beef related.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, but like meat and cuts and cooking, I've called Sarah a million times, you guys, but they do provide a really great resource of a little book of like different cuts and different ways to prepare them and resources to help me try to make all the things that are in my freezer. Um, Tell us a little bit about some of the extra parts. Like I know you were asking Court and I if we wanted, what were the choices? I know I got some liver. It's still in there. I've done nothing
Yeah.
with it.
So they're called offals. So you have your heart, liver, tongue, oxtail, hanger steak.
And what is oxtail for real? Because it's not a tail.
Well, no, it's the bones, it's the bones off the sacred, like off the base of the tail where it connects, and it has some meat onto it.
Okay.
Um, there's a really great book that Yetta gave me for the postpartum moms, and there's a really great oxtail recipe in there.
Okay.
So I know it's weird for some people, but liver is great. It has a great nutritional value if you can eat it. So liver capsules are all the rave right now, I think still. So yeah.
Mine's just in my little container in the freezer. I haven't decided what I'm doing with it. I
And
think
I'll send you recipes.
I
I think
know. And didn't you also tell me about a way that you can puree it or do something else with it? I forget. To put it
I've
in
never
something
created it.
else.
I cook it, so I think this is might be a generation thing, a lot of liver and onions.
Okay. Yeah.
And so that's how we do it. We do it with liver, onions, and bacon. Um, super great for postpartum.
Yeah. Bacon makes everything better. Well, I am definitely done having babies, so I won't need that. But really, high iron content is one of the amazing benefits. What are some of the other benefits?
Your vitamin contents in it. So your whole general vitamin contents, higher night contents. That's a lot of blood goes through that liver. So yeah.
Any other myths or misconceptions you want to touch on while you have the time and the audience and the platform about beef and health and the industry?
Beef is really delicious and really healthy for you. I know at some point there was push that it wasn't healthy. And I'm hoping that's really has gone to the wayside. But it's really healthy for you. It has a lot of great vitamins, minerals, um, and also just on the political side of things, really just watching who you're voting into office. Asking those candidates or trying to research where those candidates stand on agriculture. Farmers and ranchers feed people. And so if we don't have farmers and ranchers and we don't have the land to ranch on, then we can't feed people. And then we're kind of put in a really rough spot. And I don't think that's a spot that America wants to be put in, depending on importation of food. And so just really keeping an eye out on that, and supporting your farmers and ranchers if you can. I think something that people don't hear enough about is that farming and ranching is really a lifestyle. It's not a big money maker. A lot of people might see that there's a lot of numbers that come in, but there's also really big numbers that go out. And so mental health is a big issue with the farming and ranching community. And I don't know how hot it is in Phoenix right now, but I think it was like 109 whenever I dropped off my kids at the sitter. And so we're working out in this heat and making sure that those animals have everything that they need to stay healthy and to stay hydrated, and get all their minerals and nutrition and into their bodies in it. And so, yeah, so just definitely don't be afraid to talk to a farmer or rancher. I know some of the older generations can look grouchy. I got told this last week that I look really mean. I promise I'm not. I really love talking to people about beef and ranching and agriculture, where my knowledge base is, and I'm an open book to people for that. And so that's anyone that's wants to ask questions. And a lot of people are the same way that are in the ranching and farming community is they want to educate. And I think that's where I want to say 2 generations removed from agriculture now. And
Yeah.
so there's just a lot of education that's been lost, that's not being taught anymore. And so, yeah,
Well, and
that's near to my heart.
next year is obviously a big election year. There's no getting around that. And so what's some of the language that you either want to listen for or be concerned about if somebody actually asks a candidate at any level, state, federal, whatever, about land, about farming? What are the things you want to hear and what are the things you need to be concerned about when it comes to, because some people we're kind of selfish beings, and I feel like it takes a lot for people to be like, oh, that doesn't affect me. That doesn't affect me. But, and again, we're not going to deep dive into this, you guys, but do a little research about who owns a lot of land in this country.
Mhm.
And we need to be thinking about second and third order consequences because they are coming in hot. And so, again, not going to totally tangent on that. People can do their own research. But what are some of the things that we do want some candidates to care about or at least acknowledge as an issue?
Yeah, so, it's really hard, because they're politicians. You're not gonna get a candidate that's gonna have a background and boots on the ground, um, typically. And so, just how they answer the question as far as, do they put it off really fast? Do they dive into it? Um, that would be something that I would look for. And then also who is supporting them, who they support as far as representatives, legal. Now you're looking at lawyers. And so, what lawyers do they represent? Who do those lawyers also represent? There is an organization that puts off as being for the ranchers, and their lawyers also represent PETA.
Oh,
So, so those kind of things are definitely what you want to look for. Who's visiting your farmers and ranchers? Um,
is there anything specific? Because I know we're talking to like, it's really tricky because you might hear about a piece of legislation and you might get all worked up about who's voting for it or who's voting against it. Never mind, we're not given an honest perspective about what else is hidden in that bill and what else
yeah,
is hidden in that law. And so anything that you feel informed about or want to share with the general public with
um,
that?
yeah, so go and read them. Read what's really in them and go through them with a fine-tooth comb. I know it's time consuming, and us as Americans we get our schedules so busy that we're like, oh, we don't have time for that. We don't have time for that. Read more up on it than what's in your voting book. Um, Read more on it, see who is supporting it. And then also that NCBA website is a great resource because they are the people that are boots on the ground that go and lobby for these ranchers. And so they will have things on their website as far as what they're supporting, what they're not supporting, and trying to get things amended before they're voted on and so forth. So that's kind of
We'll
what my
make sure to
suggestion.
put their information in the show notes also. Yeah, I think, well, and you guys, they're not even hiding the money anymore. So people want to throw around the term conspiracy theory and whatnot, but follow the money. Follow the money. It's not hidden. It's not hard to track. Look at who owns land. Look who's paying for certain legislation. Like she said, look who's represented, who they're representing and who they're represented by. And just some of those pieces. But yeah, we'll put that NCBA information because yeah, when I'm sure they'll give some evidence about who they're supporting and why, and at least it's a good starting point. It's feels very daunting to try to be informed about all the things. And
It is, yeah.
the voting lines are so it's all over the place of what even constitutes a Democrat versus a Republican versus a liberal anymore. It's gotten a little bit wild and crazy. So not the point of this, but just trying to help people navigate some of the different terminology and make healthier choices. I think we really are going to need to look outside of what's available in mainstream marketing, what's available in what they're willing to make available to us, and make sure that we're supporting local so that that's not a limiting factor for us in the very near future. So where can people connect with you and your ranch specifically, Sarah?
Yeah, so like I said, I'm kind of an open book. So we have an Instagram account. So it's letter Z, Ranch Beef, and that's our Instagram. I try to share on there as much as I can, just day-to-day ranch stuff, ranch mom stuff, recipes, meal ideas. And also we have a website. So it's www.letter so ezranchbeef.com. And that's just kind of our go-to site. So it has my phone number, my email on there. We do not take orders on our website. I think that's a big thing to note to people. So all orders go directly through me. And yeah, so it kind of has a list of our inventory that we have currently, what we have available, which will be updated soon. And just any questions anyone can ask through there, or give me a call or shoot me an email.
Awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time away from your busy family and your three littles to have this chat with us and share some of your knowledge and expertise. I really appreciate it. All right, we'll post all those links she just mentioned in the show notes, you guys, and make sure that you have a way to get in touch with her. And there's another great way, if you're just looking in Arizona in general, your local farmers markets. A lot of the ranchers are showing up there, or the people who run the markets know the local ranchers. So if you're not sure where to start or don't want to just Google, hit up a farmer's market. I know over here on the West Valley, Mama's Organic Markets are still meeting all throughout the summer. It's just shortened hours earlier in the day. But they're going to be, instead of the Sunday ones, going to be out at Liberty High School instead of it was at Cabela's. And then Arrowhead Mall still happens every Saturday morning. So I know for the West Valley, I can speak to that, but there's still a lot of good farmers markets going on in the Valley. So no shortage of resources. You just got to dig a little.
Yeah,
All right,
and you
thanks
can
so
also look
yeah.
on the Arizona Cattle Growers Association. They have a page that's dedicated to local ranchers that sell directly as well. So if
Oh, great.
people, yeah, so if people want to do that, that's on there.
Perfect. I'll make sure all that's in the show notes, you guys. Please share this out, especially if you know families that are trying to eat healthier, or a lot of this information would apply even outside Arizona. They can just look up their state organization. And, it's hard to navigate all the info out there. So please share this out, like it, and stay tuned for our next episode. And we'll talk to you soon with Change the Conversations.